Welcome to the Executive Woman Podcast, Women Changing the Game. I'm your host, Dr. Sheila Robinson, and our mission is to empower women in business, leadership, and life. Each week, we bring you conversations with trailblazing executives and influential leaders who are breaking barriers and reshaping the business landscape. Through these discussions, we aim to provide you with the tools, strategies, and motivation to advance your career, and we want to empower you, and we want to make a lasting impact on not just your career, but your life also. So whether you are an aspiring leader, a seasoned executive, or somewhere in between, this podcast is dedicated to you. It's dedicated to supporting your professional journey and fostering a community of empowered women who lift each other up. Love that. And today we're thrilled to have our special guest, Ashley Avis. She is a filmmaker and the founder at Winterstone Pictures and founder of the Wild Beauty Foundation. Our episode title today is Innovating Leadership and Advocacy, a conversation with Ashley Avis. Now, before I bring her to the stage for our listeners to hear directly from her, I want to give her a proper introduction. As I said, she's the founder, director, and screenwriter at Winterstone Pictures, and that's a boutique feature film and commercial production company in Marina del Rey, California. So she has over 10 years experience in the film industry. She has directed spots for brands like Coca-Cola, Red Bull, Mercedes-Benz, and Pfizer, as well as feature films and TV series. She is passionate about storytelling and creating compelling content that resonates with audiences worldwide. Her latest project is Black Beauty. That's a modern adaptation of Anna Sewell's classic novel. This is starring Kate Winslet, a favorite, Mackenzie Foy, and Ian Glenn. And the film is a merger of her love for horses and filmmaking. She is also writing and showrunning a TV series, Briar Hollow, for Imagine Entertainment. And I'm going to stop there so that she could tell us more about her work. But I think I've told you enough to welcome Ashley. Welcome to Executive Woman, Women Changing the Game, because you certainly are changing the game. If you could just say a welcome to our viewers and share anything you would like to get us started, we'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. The empowering women is a big part of what I do as a filmmaker, as well as through my nonprofit work and working with young voices as well. And I'm fortunate to have gotten to direct and to write and produce some really special movies, including Black Beauty, which came out a few years ago on Disney Plus, and it was amazing. The reception to the film touched millions of children and families around the world and educated them about the plight of wild horses and the importance of protecting our wild world and treating the other inhabitants of this planet with compassion and respect, in addition to, those themes resonating with each other as well.
That's wonderful. So did 10-year-old Ashley know that she was going to be a filmmaker? How did you tell us about this budding filmmaker career and how it came about and, just what led you to be the founder and director at Winterstone Pictures?
Thank you. Well, I always knew I wanted to write since the day that I read one of my first Hemingway novels with my dad. I knew that literature was definitely the path that I was going to take. And when I was a kid, I was constantly writing what I thought were novels in my notebooks. And then as a teenager, in addition to writing books, I wanted to pursue a path as a journalist. And so I ended up moving to New York City for college, and I studied business, international business and marketing, while working as a journalist and also putting my foot into the world of theater and entertainment. But it was really after starting an internship when I was, I think, 19 years old with a film production company and discovering the world of screenplays that everything really clicked. And then I realized at that point, I really wanted to pursue a career as a screenwriter. But it really wasn't until I saved up a bunch of money from working a number of different odd jobs to pay the rent in New York City. I saved up money to move to Los Angeles, and with some of my savings, this was at the advent of Indiegogo and Kickstarter. Those weren't really things yet. I ended up producing and directing my first spec television pilot. And that was a window into realizing I also wanted to direct. So really, it wasn't until my early 20s that I knew I also wanted to execute my own writing as a director.
That's outstanding. I've always heard that, you know what? it doesn't take money to create that level of success. It takes passion. And I can hear your passion and your excitement in there once you determine that this is what I want to be. It's not journalism after all. So you had experiences. What was it like working with all of these major brands like Coca-Cola and Mercedes-Benz? Like, what kind of work did you do with them relevant to filmmaking?
Sure. So it took years to build up to that point. It's all about for a director, or for a producer, a production company, you really have to build up a portfolio and a reputation and an aesthetic as a filmmaker, and that takes a long time. You don't just come out of the gate with knowing exactly who you are as a filmmaker, just like you evolve as a human being over a period of time and a life. And to me, that's the same thing as filmmaking. And so originally it was really, as I was writing my first screenplays and trying to stay afloat in yet another major city, I started reaching out to smaller brands at that point in my early 20s and trying to do tiny fashion films where I wasn't making any money, but I was being given an opportunity to try to execute a creative vision. And of course, as that grew and as those budgets incrementally grew, after about, I would say about 6, 7 years, I started getting on the radar of ad agencies and doing bigger work with bigger clients. And a lot of it really was building and being very scrappy and having that independent mindset of you're not going to just get offered the job. You have to make opportunities for yourself. You have to create content for yourself to be able to give someone confidence to say, okay, I see what you're all about. I see what your aesthetic is. I see what you're in line with. And if you're in line with me, then I'm going to maybe trust you with my brand or my business or what have you. And so it took, it obviously took a lot of time. And then on the feature film side, it was the same thing, that kind of scrappy independent mentality where my partner, who's now my husband, Ed, and we raised a little bit of money for that first movie. And it wasn't enough to even pay for the gear, but we raised a bit. And then when you have momentum, usually that begets additional momentum. And that's how we got our first little independent film off the ground. And that really continued to lead toward a few additional independent films. And eventually it took about, I would say I mean, it was certainly over a decade to lead up to a film like Black Beauty.
Yeah. Ashley, you certainly have done the footwork to get where you are today. You certainly have, but it still all sounds so easy. And we know that there were challenges. So would you share with our listeners today who, regardless of what their career aspirations may be, what are some key milestones and challenges that any woman may have in her career journey, and any tools or resources you would recommend for them to overcome those challenges?
Well, I think to me, it's really about finding balance. And I'm a workaholic, and I used to, well, I still, if I'm really honest with myself, I still like that word because it's true. I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do. I'm so fortunate to be able to be in a creative capacity, getting to see new places and to tell stories that unfold that touch or move or inspire other people. I feel like for me, it's the best job in the world and feels like my calling. But I also, being brutally honest, I mean, there are points where, and I think women just do this because we overthink and we overanalyze. And I think that that's also a superpower in so many ways, but we also burn ourselves out. And I think one of the biggest things early on that I finally feel like I found some balance with, it's not perfect yet, was finding a balance between the ultimate pursuit of something really difficult and being able to find space for other things. And early on, I think one of those things, I talk about this a lot with college students. I think for me, screenwriting or directing, finding moments of forgiveness, if you're on a deadline and you're having a bad day and you've got 2 weeks to deliver something and Monday just isn't working or Thursday afternoon just isn't working, sometimes you're just going to have an off day and you've got to forgive yourself for that and take a minute and maybe go for a walk and, look at some trees for an hour, and that's okay. I think that thinking time and that allowance of resting your brain and letting thoughts come to you and inspiration comes to you. I don't think we do that enough. And I think especially as women, we're constantly up there trying to work out the problems, or we're trying to multitask with family and work and, a little bit of self-care. And I think it's finding space a little bit for those things. And for me, it really changed about 2 years. I finally started taking Sunday off with my husband because I never did. Sunday was my nonprofit day to catch up with my other job, which is having started this beautiful nonprofit for horses and wildlife. And now, and I can't take every Sunday off if I'm honest, but making that space has allowed for a spring forward of being even happier and being more productive. And so I think for me, that has been a personal challenge.
That's outstanding. That's great feedback, right, listeners? I hear her sharing about, I can just hear purposeful leadership in her. So, if you're out there, trying to figure out what your career journey will look like, we do need to find things that we're passionate about and things that has purpose for us, because that puts that energy in us to drive us to enjoy working every day. I also heard you sharing about, wellness and balance and, taking time. You remind me of Dr. Michelle Robin, who is a noted chiropractor, who says we can have an A day, a B day, and a C day. We as women, we don't need to have an A day every day. And I like that, because some days I can say, hey, this was a D day. I'll shoot for the A or the B tomorrow. So thank you for sharing that, Ashley. But you was talking about one of your projects. I love to take this time now to jump into some of your projects, which are amazing. But so the latest project, Black Beauty, talk a little bit about the inspiration behind it and the significance, and we can drive our listeners to make sure we tag our calendars to be ready for, to view it.
Well, Black Beauty actually, it has been a phenomenal film and it's reached so many people. It actually came out in 2020. So that has reached millions of kids and families around the world. And
Okay.
it led into creating a documentary, which my husband and I spent about 5 years on, called Wild Beauty, Mustang Spirit of the West. So we started it a little bit before Black Beauty, completed it after, but really Black Beauty was the inspiration into creating a documentary that was essentially like a Blackfish for wild horses. And because so few people know what wild horses are going through in the West, and we touched upon this in modernizing the Black Beauty story for Disney, but one of my great passions is trying to protect wildlife. And so few people know that in our country, we have the beauty of wild horses. We can go see them running free on 10 Western states. And we've got them on the East Coast too, in places like Kerala and Chincoteague. But in the West, wild horses aren't really celebrated in some of these states.
Wow.
And there's this big battle over land and special interests and catering to the wealthy few, where wild horses are getting eradicated and so few people know. And they deserve to be federally protected, which they are. Our children deserve to go see natural landscapes that aren't just taken over for commercial livestock interests, which is the main fight with the wild horse issue. And so it's become really a life's work and a passion for me, really starting with Black Beauty, which was the book that inspired me to love horses as a kid. And the Black Beauty messages have really carried over into our work to protect wild horses. So between Black Beauty and Wild Beauty, the documentary, both of those projects have really become tools to inspire and educate children. And for Wild Beauty, that wasn't made for kids, but that's been used in colleges now. We've taken that film to Congress. We've been in DC, I think 5 times in the past 3.5 years. We were just there a couple of weeks ago again, this time with actress Diane Lane, who just got nominated for an Emmy, and she saw Wild Beauty and she was moved by it, and she said, how can I help? And that ended up becoming an event that we did within the Capitol for members of Congress and staff and press. And we're trying to now move forward legislation to help protect wild horses before we lose them. And so that's really those projects. It's amazing how life works. Our Wild Beauty documentary was very scrappy and independent. We returned to those roots right after creating Black Beauty, but it was actually our very next project is a film called American Wolf. And it was because I showed our documentary to Leonardo DiCaprio's production company. They brought me aboard to write and direct a project that is based on this amazing New York Times bestseller called American Wolf. And it details some of the same issues wild horses are facing with the eradication of wolves in our country and why, and a lot of misinformation and disinformation about the importance of wolves to the ecosystem. And so and that isn't a documentary. That's a movie that Apple is going to be making. They just announced it, and it'll probably be out. I'm writing the screenplay right now, but that film will probably be out in 2 or 3 years. So I'm working on that and a couple of other really exciting features right now.
Congratulations. What a beautiful story, Ashley. And so these are wonderful projects you're working on, Ashley. I don't know where you have time to do anything else, but I understand you're one of the published authors in Mission Matters. Mission-based leaders share inspiring stories on power and purpose. And certainly, after all we have heard, you definitely have a story to tell. Would you like to share a little bit about that, your work, working with Dr. Nancy O'Reilly on the Mission Matters Power and Purpose book?
Absolutely. I feel like when we follow our calling or the path that opens up in life and we walk down that path where we encounter really special people that help us take the right turn through the woods sometimes. And meeting Dr. Nancy O'Reilly, the timing of our initial contact was so critical to Wild Beauty as a documentary. Meeting her was critical to helping lift up the foundation. Dr. Nancy is one of these just guardian angel people that have a heart of gold. She obviously loves horses. She wants to empower women. And we just really believe in a lot of the same things. And so I was so honored when she asked me to participate in the book, because one of the things that I love speaking about, especially to young people, is that storytelling has a responsibility, and you don't need to just be a screenwriter or an author. We all tell stories. We've been telling stories as human beings since the beginning of time. And so even in your day-to-day life, if you're coming across somebody that you don't know on the street and you have an interaction, you might be telling a story. And so what story are you choosing to tell and put out into the world in those big ways and those small ways? And so for me, obviously, that is definitely quite a bit more literal with the work I'm putting out into the world, but I do try to come back to that often. And so when I was trying to think about what my chapter would be for this book with Mission Matters, I think that that's the key theme, that storytelling has a responsibility. And I really came to that through Black Beauty, because Anna Sewell, so many people think Black Beauty was written as a children's book, and it's still one of, I think, the top 25 most read children's books in the world still today, published in the late 1800s. She didn't necessarily write it as a children's book. She wrote it as an animal welfare plea, and that's why she wrote it from the first-person perspective of a horse, because Anna Sewell was crippled as a little girl, and she was carried by horses, and that inspired her deep love and connection with them and her understanding of them in a time where horses by a lot of people were looked at as tools or equipment, and they weren't looked at as the emotional, empathetic, intelligent, family-oriented beings that they are. And Anna Sewell helped shape our modern day understanding of horse and animal empathy. And so in modernizing Black Beauty, I realized, goodness, if that film is successful, who am I reaching and what do we want to say? And obviously so much of that was inspired by Anna and her spirit and what she put into Black Beauty. And then that really carried over into Wild Beauty and why we pursued that. And so that's continuing only to build through our other work and through these other projects we've been called to. I've been saying recently, and I feel like it's true, the wild horses have now called us to the wolves. And it's through getting those messages out, which is why I was so proud to be an author in this book and put some of those thoughts and feelings into a chapter that hopefully inspires someone to think about what they want to put into the world. And I think when we think to the future like that, because I think we all in some way want to leave a legacy or do something, and whether that's changing the life of a child or it's putting out a great message into the world, I think that storytelling being a responsibility and kind of trying to think about your daily life and your career like that, it makes me feel inspired to do better and to try to be, even we all get frustrated trying to come back to kindness and elegance and strength. So I loved writing that chapter, and I hope that people resonate with it.
I'm certain we will. And, talking about how you love working with college students and, just a couple of questions for emerging leaders. Do you have any tips for women who might aspire to break into the film making and even philanthropy? What are your insights on, anyone going after creative passions and entrepreneur ventures such as this?
I think it's really about trying as many things as you can to find the nucleus of your passion because it takes some time to figure out and dig that out. Because, when I started, I'm like, I want to be a novelist. I want to write children's books. I want to do sci-fi fantasy. I've always been such a romantic, so elegant love stories. And really, and I love the wild. As a kid, I was always in a tree with my thesaurus or a book of poetry, and that was my childhood. Was I loved nature, but I think with a profession, it's drilling into the nucleus of what you want to put out into the world. And if you think about the question, why am I here? Why am I here? What am I here to do besides hopefully live a good and healthy life? But beyond that, what stories am I putting out into the world? And that comes back to kind of, what do you want to pursue as a profession? And so trying things and experimenting to figure out the shape of that nucleus. And I think some of that is coming back to what inspired you as a kid. What did you want to do as a child? Because sometimes whether it's literal or you're finding shades of that, that might be applicable to your professional career. And I think making mistakes is also such an important part of growth, even when in the moment you think the world is falling in a couple of years. Even if you don't always look back and smile broadly, you've learned something and you've stretched and you've grown. And I think that if you can't imagine waking up in the morning and not doing something, then you've properly drilled down to figure out what you're called to do. And I think it's when you feel that calling and that sense of purpose that brings you joy, and that makes it not feel like work every day.
Well said, Ashley. You certainly have shared with us how your personal values and experiences have shaped your professional career, and we can learn from that. So, as we near the end of our time together, which has been amazing, are there any specifics that you want to share with our listeners on upcoming projects you want us to look out for? And, anything that you want to share with us to highlight, what the future can look like for your organization?
Thank you. So I would say, kind of in closing, go out and be fearless. And when you find that thing, don't let it go. I feel like our business in the film industry, it's like trying to wrap your arms around a tornado sometimes. But if you love what you're doing, you can't let go. And usually blue skies are on the other side. So be fearless and go out with passion and pursuit. And for me, my next projects, in addition to American Wolf with Appian Way, Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, and Apple, which I'm writing right now. I've also written and I'm set to direct a reimagining of a sweeping love story called City of Angels that we're doing with Warner Brothers with a couple of amazing producers, most notably of which is Charles Roven, who produced Oppenheimer, and he and his late wife actually produced City of Angels, the 1990s version with Nicolas Cage and Meg Ryan that everyone fell in love with the great soundtrack. And so he is the main producer on our reimagining of City of Angels. So we're hoping to be in production, fingers crossed, early next year.
And how long does it take from where that part is to production for something to reach the public?
Well, I mean, we've been developing City of Angels for almost 3 years now. And so once we actually get the green light, that's when things tend to sometimes a little bit quicker. So if we film City of Angels, and again, this is all theoretical, none of this has been confirmed by the studio, but if we filmed it early this year, there could be a chance that it would be out for the holidays at the end of 2025. So I'm very much hoping that that's the timeline. And then in addition
Outstanding.
to, thank you. And I would just say, in addition to our film work, please follow our nonprofit work for the horses and wildlife at the Wild Beauty Foundation. We're on the major social media channels, and please raise your voices for wild horses and wildlife because they need us right now, and we've got to leave a better planet for our children and their children's children.
That is so true. I thought that you must have a lot of patience too, Ashley, because I thought publishing a magazine was a long time because we start sometimes a year, sometimes 18 months in advance before going to print, which is so hard now when you have a print publication because things turn over. So, do you think any soft skills, leadership skills like patience and courage and anything you want to share that has to play out in a business like this?
For me, I think learning about the joys as well as the hardships of your coworkers. If on a film set, that means everybody from the prop master to the production assistants to the production designer to costumes to your producers. And I am a producer, so I understand. Yeah, I'm a director that understands budget, and that tends to help sometimes because you can't always stomp your feet and say, I want this. You've got to look at, what you're working with. And sometimes that's a lot of money. Sometimes that's not very much at all. But I think over the years of becoming a filmmaker and working, I'm so fortunate to work with my husband, who's my partner in all things. But when we got started with our first independent films, we were wearing so many hats because we couldn't afford to hire people. So for our first movie, we're doing the scouting trip out into the desert and getting lost and trying to figure out how to put together a crew when you don't have enough people, and doing a lot of things ourselves that other positions would usually cover. But I'm so fortunate and lucky and grateful to have had those experiences because after rather three movies like that and getting to direct Black Beauty and having a full crew, it was just such a gratifying experience to be able to look especially at problems and say, I can help with that because I've kind of done a little bit of that, and you can speak the other person's language a little bit. And then that opens up a deeper type of relationship. And I think that kind of leadership is just very important, trying to learn a little bit of everything so that you can speak that other person's language. And I think always trying to come back to life is full of different shades and emotions, and hopefully everyone's is full of joy. But of course, we're human. There are moments of frustration and sometimes anger, and trying to find a way to pause before being reactionary and just trying to look at someone else's perspective. And even if it's a half a breath and taking a beat and trying to just find a little bit of extra calm before you react, I think is a kind of a pillar to good leadership and to a great working environment. Is when people are happy, they do their best work.
All right. That brings us to the end of the episode. Ashley, thank you so much. So we want listeners, we will not forget, she says to remain fearless and continue to find joy. Find joy. I love that. Remain fearless in our work and finding joy you can't miss. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experiences with us, Ashley. Your journey and your dedication to the work that you do is so inspiring. And to our listeners, we hope you found this conversation as enlightening as I did. It certainly has inspired me. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review because your support helps us continue bringing these valuable discussions. Remember, I'm going to ask Ashley to remind us where we can go to website or whatever. I want to remind us, even though Black Beauty has been out, those of us that have not seen it, where can we see it? So any tips on finding resources of the work for your foundation that we can contribute to in watching the film, if you would give us those last few minutes, Ashley.
Sure. So our work can be followed at the Wild Beauty Foundation, personally at Ashley Avis, and then our Wild Beauty Mustang Spirit of the West as a documentary is streaming pretty much everywhere. It's on Amazon, it's on iTunes, it's on Spectrum, Dish, everywhere, and hopefully Black Beauty was acquired by Disney Plus, and you can search for it through Disney Plus and their platform. And then our next films hopefully will be debuting over the next year or two. And I can't wait to share them.
Okay, outstanding. Thank you for tuning in, listeners, and we'll be back next week with another inspiring guest. Until then, keep striving for excellence and supporting one another. And remember, Ashley said, be fearless and find joy. Thank you.